Picture this. It's the dead of winter, 1959, in the desolate Ural Mountains. A team of 9, all experienced hikers, is heading out into one of the most remote and brutal wildernesses on the planet. They're young, they're skilled, they're ready for anything. But what they were about to encounter, well, it was something beyond anyone's worst nightmare. The hikers were weeks late checking in, so when a search party finally reaches their campsite on the slopes of Kolotsiakal, a mountain whose local name, by the way, translates to Mountain of the Dead, they find the first piece of an absolutely terrifying puzzle. The camp was just empty, completely abandoned.
And this is the detail that has haunted investigators and researchers for over 60 years. The tent, their only protection from the brutal sub-zero cold, wasn't torn apart by a storm or an animal. No, it had been deliberately sliced open, from the inside. Whatever horror those 9 hikers were facing, in that tent, it was somehow worse than the certain death of freezing in the Siberian wilderness.
So that's the central question, isn't it? Why would anyone do that? They fled into total panic, leaving behind their coats, their boots, all their supplies. What could possibly have driven them to make such a clearly fatal choice? Well, as investigators would soon find out, the answers were only going to get a whole lot stranger.
The search for the hikers themselves revealed a scene that wasn't just tragic, it was profoundly bizarre. What the search party found scattered across the snow, it just defied any simple explanation and only made the mystery that much deeper.
Okay, so the bodies were discovered in different groups over the next few weeks, some nearly a mile away from the tent. 2 were found by a tree, dressed only in their underwear. 3 others looked like they were trying to crawl back to the camp. But it's the last 4, found months later in a ravine, where this puzzle becomes truly disturbing. There are absolutely no signs of a fight, yet several of them had suffered these catastrophic internal injuries. And maybe the most gruesome detail of all, one of the victims, Ludmila Dubinina, was found with her tongue missing.
You know, the most baffling part was the nature of these injuries. Medical experts said the force needed to cause something like a flail chest, that's where multiple ribs are broken in multiple places, is similar to the impact of a car crash. But, and this is the impossible part, there was no external damage, no bruising, no cuts, not even damage to the soft tissue. It was like some immense crushing force had been applied that somehow didn't even break the skin.
In fact, the injuries were so extreme that the lead investigator himself, Lev Ivanov, went on record saying that no human could have been responsible. The force was simply too great. So that official conclusion ruled out a simple attack and, opened the door to much, much stranger possibilities.
And just when you think the scene couldn't get any more impossible, there was this, a final, baffling detail that feels like it belongs in a completely different story. Traces of radioactivity were found on some of their clothes. Now, this wasn't just some weird, random detail. It was a clue that pointed away from any natural explanation, like an avalanche. An impossible scene, inhuman injuries, and now radiation.
So, faced with an impossible crime scene and, you can imagine, a lot of public speculation, Soviet authorities needed an official answer, and they needed it fast. The one they landed on was a natural phenomenon, something that could, at least on the surface, explain why the group panicked in the first place. The official theory is a slab avalanche. So the idea is that this large, heavy plate of snow fractured and just slid down right on top of their tent. Trapped, panicked, in total darkness, the hikers would have had no choice but to cut their way out and just run, probably fearing a second, even bigger avalanche was coming.
Now, for years, critics shot this down, saying the slope was way too gentle for an avalanche. But a recent 3D model from a 2021 study shows that's not the whole story. While the average slope is low, the ground there is made of these kinds of steps. And the specific spot right above where they pitched the tent was steep enough, over 28 degrees, to make a slab avalanche a very real threat.
The avalanche theory, it explains some things pretty well. The damaged tent, the desperate need to get out fast, but it leaves these huge gaping holes. Could a small avalanche really cause car crash-level injuries without leaving a single bruise? And why would the hikers scatter in different directions, some walking for over a kilometer? And what about the radiation? The official story, it just doesn't add up.
So, with the official theory leaving so many questions on the table, speculation has just run wild for decades. The gaps in the story have been filled with explanations that range from the kind of plausible all the way to the paranormal.
And the list of alternative theories is long, let me tell you. Everything from a KGB hit squad to a UFO has been blamed for what happened. Some people even point to a yeti or the local mink as the culprit. But among the more grounded, and honestly maybe more disturbing possibilities, are a couple that really deserve a closer look.
You have to remember, this was the height of the Cold War. The Ural Mountains were a hub for Soviet military and industrial activity, and a lot of it was top secret. So this theory suggests the hikers were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe they witnessed something they shouldn't have, like a missile test or some new kind of concussive weapon. That would definitely explain the powerful yet traceless internal injuries. And of course, the radioactivity.
And there's actually testimony to support this. A guy named Hamza Sunakayev, who was part of the military search party, he later remembered hearing these loud explosions, like cannon fire, in the area while they were searching. They were so loud, in fact, they had to ask Moscow to stop the blasting so they could work. He figured the source was no more than 10 kilometers away.
Okay, now for another really compelling theory, and this one involves a bizarre natural phenomenon, infrasound. The specific dome shape of the mountain, combined with high winds, could create something called a Kármán vortex street. Basically, it can generate these powerful low-frequency sound waves. You can't hear it, but studies suggest it can have terrifying effects on the human body, causing feelings of intense, irrational dread and panic. It could be the thing that explains why they fled their tent in a mindless terror.
So where does all of this leave us? We've got a collection of incredibly bizarre facts, a few compelling but incomplete theories, and a case that officially remains very much unsolved.
The final Soviet report was, let's just say, deliberately vague. It concluded the hikers were killed by a compelling natural force. And with that, the case was slammed shut and the files were classified. Of course, an unsatisfying conclusion like that did nothing but fuel decades and decades of speculation about a cover-up.
And speaking of a cover-up, the lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, actually came forward years later in 1990. He admitted that he and other officials had seen these strange glowing spheres in the sky around that time. He confessed that he suspected a UFO was involved, but was ordered by high-ranking officials to just close the case and classify all the records.
An avalanche doesn't explain the injuries or the radiation. A military weapon doesn't really explain the scattered bodies or the missing tongue. Infrasound doesn't explain the crushing chest wounds. After all this time, we're still faced with a collection of facts that simply refuse to fit into one neat and tidy box.
When you strip away all the speculation and all the theories, you are left with one undeniable, horrifying truth. Something happened on that mountain that was so terrifying, so completely overwhelming, that 9 rational, experienced people chose to abandon their only shelter and run barefoot into a frozen wasteland, a choice that led directly to their deaths.
And that is the question that remains. An avalanche? A secret military test? A freak weather event? Or something else entirely? Whatever it was, it remains hidden by time, secrecy, and the desolate snows of the Ural Mountains, leaving all of us to wonder, what exactly did they meet on the Mountain of the Dead?